right? They were attempting to cut it. So, and when people who, how it is, people don't fight. Of course, we don't fight with sharps. We do test cutting, as you know, in our team. But still, no one cuts mail, right? No one cuts mail. So then the assumption is there is no way that you could go. And then even on really hardened kolahut, there are two in Military Museum of Tehran, beautiful, hard, really hard, everything riveted. You see attempts of cut, really attempts and cut on the ball of the helmet, right? And you see that there is a cut, and then I just say, God, you see, back then, in the middle of the fight, people wanted to kill each other, so they hit. It's not that, let me just look for an opening. You understand what I mean?
Well, I think the thing is that when you're fighting somebody, you don't know whether they've got grade A armor or grade B armor or grade C armor. So you put it in. The other thing is, I don't want to criticize people, but a lot of Europeans, when they try and use swords like this, hack.
Yes,
they don't cut. And our experience was that with curved swords that were well designed, that they cut much better than they hacked. And I think there's an Austrian author in the 1700s who made the comment that we can give Turkish swords to our cavalrymen, but they just break in their hands because they hit things like it's an axe and they don't cut across us. And I think this is what was happening. If you were fighting a guy and you did a slash across his mail and it cut through some of the rings, then your next move would be to put the point through the hole.
Yes.
If it didn't cut through the rings, well, you just kept fighting. It was and to add to our Kazaghand discussion, there's a section in the Baba Namah where Baba is in a fight. This is before he invaded India. And he's wearing a silk padded cap, by which I mean that the inner and outer layers of silk, and the padding was silk floss under his kulahud. And in the fight, somebody hit his helmet and the strap that held it on broke, and his helmet went flying, but he still had the cap. The next hit was straight at his head. And he said, it didn't cut through the cap. It split his scalp down to the bone, but it didn't cut through the cap. It was a pressure cut through the thing. The Kazaghand with its silk layers, you remember Usamah's talking about padding and silk and rabbit fur. Rabbit fur actually might be rabbit fur felt, because in Australia, our classic Akubra hats are felt hats made with rabbit fur. Rabbit fur makes excellent felt. And you got to remember, in Iran and Central Asia and Turkey, people knew how to make good felt.
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah.
It goes back. I mean, I've got Wolf's Traditional Crafts of Persia, and he cites examples going back into like Achaemenid times and that, where bits and pieces of felt have turned up and things. So in reality, what we're looking at is by putting the mail amidst layers of fabric, you're getting the effect of the Akaton or the whatever, but the mail to some extent is protected. So if you pick your sword up and you slash at a Kazaghand, you may or may not cut through the silk, but that to some extent takes some of the energy out of the blow. I don't know why I'm holding my hand in front of the blade there. That's a really stupid thing to do. And so that therefore each, and of course the real thing is, if you're striking a person who appears to be wearing a jacket or a kaftan or something, if you don't know there's mail in there, you don't strike with the same force, because you're trying to cut flesh, and that's a different thing. And you've got to remember how well trained swordsmen were in the East, in the Middle East in particular. We know from Mamluk surviving stuff and Furusiyya things going back to the Abbasid period in Iraq, that people trained with cutting exercises with special swords, with mounds of clay and like the later English lead cutting, where you had a block of lead or something, where it would be on a table and the thing was to strike, to perfectly cut it without touching the table. And you practice this. You cut until you had both the strength and the control. And you've got to think what one of these people would do against an average mail shirt. Remember, I think I cannot give you a percentage, but more than 50% of the mail that has survived is not hardened. And I mean, it's still a really good protection. But when you get somebody who's been training for 15 years, you're in trouble. Now, the thing is that maces were very popular in Iran and in Anatolia and in Egypt among the Mamluk, because maces are really good if you're fighting somebody in mail, because you can deliver a powerful impact through the mail. Whether it breaks the mail or not doesn't matter. The guy underneath is going to have broken ribs or broken arms or whatever. So the combat systems took into account the weaknesses and the strengths of mail. I wouldn't bet my life on cutting through someone's mail, but there must have been enough times that it happened. There are, I mean, you see in Persian miniatures, and everyone says it's exaggerated, where people have their helmets split in half and their head as well. But some of these things are actually referenced to in actual histories. Yeah. And not every helmet was perfect. The thing is, if your helmet looks really good and strong, people won't hit at it. There's a level of deterrence. Don't waste your time hitting at this helmet. It's just going to deflect it. But if somebody gets really angry or realizes you don't have a good quality helmet and decides to go whack, now they may cut the helmet through the helmet. It's very unlikely. Might happen. But if they don't and the helmet's low quality, they may split the front part and break your skull. And that's just as nasty a way to go as having a head split in half. I mean, there's I think Timurid paintings of people being beheaded in battle, and they show the blood spurting out of the arteries in their neck. Yes. And this is, look, they could learn that from just killing goats for a kebab, but there's a lot of references to these overpowered blows. And even this sword, which is of no great quality, is quite thick at the back. It's a solid blade. It will do damage. The shamshirs I've seen were wedge shaped. They were like sometimes a 1/4 inch thick at the back. This is 6 millimeters. And maybe the blade is only that wide, which is like 22, 23 millimeters. That construction is immensely strong. And you've got something as hard as a Wootz blade, or even, and people, you know, say, oh, well, there's Wootz blades and there's pattern welded blades. Some pattern welded blades are actually stronger than Wootz blades because of the way they've been constructed. I've got a pattern welded tulwar that could cut through 2 Sydney telephone books, this much paper. And we're not talking about soaking them in water first. This is just this, and not going whack. This is just flick. And you get a slice like one of those paper guillotines used for because these are really good at cutting, as long as you use the right technique. And you know, not the hack, but it's like the same grip as you have on the bow, where the bottom 3 fingers are tight and the top 2 fingers are a fork pushing forward. You're holding them so you don't drop the sword, but when you hit, you're not pushing the sword once it's in contact, you're letting its weight do the damage. And these swords, all of that style of curved sword, even the slightly curved swords, are really good at cutting if you're hitting and pulling at the same time. Having said that, a good qazāgand, which has the advantage of not necessarily, because the whole thing in Usamah is that the guy didn't even believe how strong it was. It had 2 layers of mail up here where most of the blows were going to go. It was deceptive. You didn't know what was inside. It could be just padding. but it could be 2 layers of mail or 1 layer of really good high quality mail. It was comfortable to wear. So when you're walking around in it, you're not walking as though you're wearing something heavy. I see a lot of people saying, well, I know people who've worn mail all day and they get used to it. But you can generally pick that they're wearing it because they're suddenly weighing, you know, like another 10 or 15 kilos more than they normally weigh. And you walk slightly differently. And if you're trained, you probably pick these things up. I don't know. I didn't live in the 15th century. I have no memories of that. I don't know what really happened. And as you say, modern.
I mean, in my, you know, in a bit, it's like, especially in the field of people who do, like, as you said, you know, before, like gaming and like this. You know, I remember when I was in an event, and I don't want to criticize, but a guy said, this is very interesting. It's okay, I'm not criticizing. He said, oh yeah, back then people trained a lot. Today, and he was drinking so much. It's okay, right? It was an event, one after the other. It's okay. I'm not criticizing. But he said, today, we are not like that. And I looked at him and I said, I know people today who train even more than people like back then, professional athletes. You understand? You know, but because he's not a professional athlete and he keeps drinking, like, I don't know how he could drink so much. I said, we cannot do that. I said, don't say we, say you. They're professional athletes who train hours and hours a day.
Yeah.
You see, you see what I mean. You know?
You meet people who absolutely freak you out with their abilities because they do put that effort in. I mean, I've known people who are just naturally good at things. I had a friend who was a natural archer. He could just pick up a bow and hit things without even thinking about what he was doing.
Yeah.
I know people that have trained to shoot heavy bows.
Yeah.
And I don't think they realize how good they are. I think that a lot of people that do these difficult things don't understand how good they are, because the average person is the guy having a few drinks and putting in an hour or two's training a week and thinking, well, that's all we can do these days, when there are other people that get up early in the morning and exercise for a couple of hours and then go to work and come home and exercise again and then go to bed. I'm not that guy. My archery skills are reasonable. They're not great because I don't practice every day. I practice every other day. But I can see in people, because I've done it so long, where their skill level is much further advanced than the average person. And by average person, I mean the average good archer, not the average person in the street who can't shoot a bow at all. But within that spectrum of people who know how to shoot, some people are just better at it. And they're better at it because they put more effort into it and they understand what their body's doing. And whether it doesn't matter what form of archery they're doing, it's just they get better at it. I see, well, we saw in New Zealand, we were in the same place at the same time. We saw people fighting with swords and things like that. And there were some people that were enjoying it immensely, but they weren't athletes. So therefore, their skill level was limited by that. There are other people who were so dedicated that they never enjoyed it because they were never as good as they thought they should be. And there was a small group of people that had just got that balance right, where they were really good and they were comfortable with it. You've got to have both the mental and the physical. You can't be one or the other. Yeah. I'm unfortunately too much on the mental side. I think, have got a good balance. But other people I know have achieved a good balance just by dint of practice, reflection on what they're doing. If they're really lucky, they get good trainers. This is a magic thing when you've got somebody that can tell you how to do something properly. And it's just wonderful to see. I mean, I like it. I've known people that through their own efforts have developed really good skills, and they're a pleasure to watch, because you can see everything working together. You can see their balance, the power. You can, with things like swords and that, obviously it's a little bit more difficult because you can't use them the way they were meant to be used because you kill people. The advantage I found in archery is I can shoot at a target. The difference between a target and a person is only the degree of movement they have, which you can compensate for. But sword fighting, spear fighting, this is much more difficult because you have to limit what you do. Because even an ordinary person with a spear could kill you really easily if it was sharp and they weren't careful. Swords, yeah, they have their ups and downs. There's been a case in Australia where someone was attacked in their home and then they chased down the person that attacked them and hit them with a sword recently, and they've gone to jail for manslaughter because it was excessive. The person was running away. You didn't have to hit them. But even so, I think it was more bad luck than good management that the sword did the damage that it did. And it really did the damage as a club rather than as a sword. Because, you know, it takes real skill to use a sword properly. And when we go back to looking at things like various types of armor, when you're fighting people in armor, the level of skill must be so much higher. Because you don't know whether or not your blow is going to work or whether it's going to be deflected, which puts you off balance and then you're open to them. You don't know whether it's going to work partially and you make a big hole in their mail and all of a sudden you've got an opening and you can go for it. Because it's not that, if they don't realise you've done that, well, it's better. If they realise and they've got a shield or whatever, then they're going to defend themselves. And maybe it will attract your attention and make you a worse fighter for that period. See, every time you go into any kind of combat, you're taking a gamble, which is a good reason for not getting into fights, because most gamblers lose. So yeah, I don't know, but honestly, I think Kazaghnd's, because of the fact today, right, amongst people who make armor and people who fight in HEMA or whatever, and they wear armor, they don't want to hide all that work they put into the mail. But back when it was a part of regular life, that wasn't the important thing. If you could afford mail, see, a lot of people now make their own armor. Some people they found good armorers and they buy their armor. But in the old days, people bought their armor. If they were rich enough, they got it fitted to them and everything like that. And it was probably part of showing off that you could have a mail shirt inside a jacket that no one could see, because you were just so good that you didn't have to demonstrate you had good armor. And in fact, this, I think, is what Usamah is doing in this. He's making fun of this Turkish commander because his armor is so good and it doesn't look like armor. Yes. Without cutting open the seam to show him the armor, the guy wouldn't have even believed there was armor in there because it fitted him well. He didn't seem to be slowed down or anything by it. And again, he had two mules following him with armor in little boxes and leather bags and everything, because we don't put our armor on until we're about to fight. I think I told you a few years ago that there's a Chinese Mongolian movie made in Mongolia, and it's the first and only time I've seen. It's supposedly Mongols during the lifetime of Genghis Khan, and they're riding along, and some have got their helmets on and that, but they've got boxes on their pack horses with their armor in it, because that's what people really did. Yeah. Because otherwise you'd die of heat stroke, even in Mongolia. I sometimes think it's something to do with the gaming ethic of getting accoutrements, and there's no a requirement for them to be possibly worn or carried at the same time, because you have a sword on your shoulder and all this kind of stuff. But really, it actually goes back earlier than that. I think even in the 19th century, they were talking about unrealistic burdens for people to carry. In medieval Europe, in the time when they had good plate armor and good mail under it sometimes, there were people getting shot in the face all the time because it was so hot. You had to have your visor up as much as you could. And if you didn't expect to be shot at, or you didn't think the arrows were going to reach you, then for your own comfort and health, because otherwise you might end up with heat stroke or something, you opened your visor. And the first thing someone did when they saw a face was shoot at it. And there's a beautiful ill-carned miniature of two armies charging each other in full armor, except they're all got bare faces because they didn't have face armor in this period. And there's one guy who's just shot his bow, and there's another guy clutching an arrow in his face.
It's a nice one. Yeah.
And the thing is, I've got an arrowhead like that, and it would only work on bare skin because it's like a broadhead. I don't know if I've got one laying around. Oh, no, I put it away. But it's basically a reverse triangle. So the base of the triangle is the cutting edge, and the tip of the triangle attaches to the bolster and the tang. And these are clearly painted in this miniature. And there's lots of them. I've got a few. They've been dug up all over the world where the Mongols went. They went, whether the Mongols invaded them or not, it's hard to say, because there were an awful lot of them made by the Jurchen in China, because they dig foundations for new buildings and find bucket loads of this stuff in old armories and that had been buried for centuries. I don't know if I've got any laying around. Oh, wait a minute. Here's a plastic bag full of old arrowheads from the 11th century, as you often have. Here's one of the ones that's got a slight point.
Oh, where are they from?
These are from the old Jin kingdom. These are the people that ruled North China.
Okay.
And Manchuria in the 1100s, 1200s. So this was a bag of arrowheads that Stephen Selby gave me. And these are for war, but specifically to use against exposed parts of the body. This one's, I don't think you can see it, but it's even slightly offset, like the blades are, the ridge isn't the same on both sides.
Yeah.
So, whereas this is basically a hunting arrowhead. Quite thin, large cutting area. I mean, you could use that against a person, but more useful. I've really got to clean this up. This is the type.
Yeah.
This is in ill-carned miniatures. Shot into the face, into the eye socket, I think, in the one I saw. And it's just a wedge. I bought some arrowheads that have, here's another type, slightly rounded. They're quite a variety. They dig these up still attached to arrow shafts in Mongolia in tombs all the time. But they're very simple. See, it's just hammered out so that there's like a little round bolster to stop it splitting the shaft. And it's basically just a flat blade with a tang. These tangs, the length of these tangs, this is corrosion. They would have been probably a third longer in reality. These are, and the thing you can say about them is they're meant for wooden arrows, not for bamboo arrows, because the tangs are short. So bearing in mind that people had arrowheads like this, and they would have had a selection of different arrows. If you're wearing an armor that doesn't look like an armor, they're going to think, I can shoot this guy in the body, as I said earlier, and it will kill him. But mail would stop one of these because they're not designed for going through mail.
No, he will stop.
And so therefore you get the second chance. He shoots an arrow at you. If you've got a bow, you shoot an arrow at him. You don't make that mistake. You aim at his face or his throat if it's visible. And we discuss in many times in battle where you've got lines of horse archers or lines of foot archers or whatever. You're not shooting to hit that person right in front of you. You're shooting to hit anybody in that row of people. So you pick a person to aim at to get your elevation and everything right. But you don't care if you hit that guy or the guy next to him on either side. That's not important. As long as you get the arrows in that plane, then you've achieved what you want to do. But when you're when the battle breaks up into individual fights, and there's quite a few Furnished manuals that discuss this, then you've got this situation where a guy might be shooting at you, or he might be coming at you with a lance, and you might have your bow in your hand. What am I going to do? I'm going to drop the bow and get my shield off my back, and do I do this or do I do that? So there's a whole tactical approach to how you deal with this person coming at you. Now, if you don't know that he's wearing, you guess that he's wearing armor, but you don't know that he's wearing armor, then you're in this situation of where do I shoot at? And of course, shooting at the face, well, you think about it, you look, even me with my weirdy little shoulders, my torso is at least 3 times wider than my face. So that means it's 3 times easier to hit than my face. So therefore, given the choice, if it was practical, you would shoot at the torso. I mean, there has to be a reason that so many armors like China cover that part of the torso,
You know,
to stop you shooting there.
You know, Bede, the first lesson I learned in boxing and kickboxing, hit the chest, the head follows.
Yeah.
You see, hit the chest, the head follows, right?
And if the person that you're fighting has their chest protected, then you don't have a choice. If you want to do damage, you've got to hit their head.
Yes.
And their head's hard to hit. It's easy to move the head. It's not quite so easy to move the body.
Yeah,
so, I mean, this is why something like a Kazaghand is an interesting thing, because it has so many layers of usefulness.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
So,
very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. It was a pleasure having you here on the channel. It was a very good thing, and thanks a lot. And we are going to have another talk soon then. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.